The story begins with our main protagonist, Baji, who was born deaf and couldn't speak. He was so weak that he couldn't even swing his sword and was despised by his own people, even though he was the rightful first prince, unlike his brother called Dida, who had a strong physique. As the first child, Baji fought hard to inherit his father's throne and to become the greatest king in the world. However, his people doubted him because he was so weak. The story focuses on a place called Bas Kingdom, led by a king called Bas. Bas was one of the strongest kings in his era, who managed to rank 7th among the strongest kings. Unfortunately, King Bas began to fall ill in his old age, and it was said that his life would end soon. So the king of Bas was required to immediately appoint which prince would be the heir to the royal throne. King Bas had 2 sons, Baji and Dida. Baji was the son of his first wife who had died, while Dida was the son of his second wife, called Hiling. Baji and Dida are very different in terms of physique and strength. Baji has a small and short body with weak physical strength, while Dida has a tall body and stronger physical strength. Baji has been mute since birth, as he is unable to speak and has been deaf his entire life. Many people in the Bas Kingdom do not want Baji to be the heir to the throne as they believe he is useless and weak, so they would prefer Dida to replace his father on the throne instead. One day, when Baji was playing on the hill, he met a shadowy figure who could talk called Cage. Cage approached Baji to rob his belongings, and we discover that he is part of a shadow clan who are fiercely loyal to the master they have chosen. However, several years ago, the Shadow Clan was accused of treason, so the entire clan was captured and killed, but Cage is the only one left that still survives today. After Baji gave all his clothes and belongings to Cage, he immediately left and returned to the kingdom. Cage was surprised as Baji casually gave all his belongings away without a second thought. When Baji returned, he was harshly insulted by the residents passing by along the way to the palace because the citizens knew that Baji could not speak or hear. King Bas, who was aware that Baji was often underestimated by all the kingdom, had tried to make Baji appear more authoritative by providing sword training to Baji with one of the royal sword trainers called Domes. However, due to Baji's small body and weak physical strength, he still cannot compare to the strength of his brother Dida, and always loses when he fights one-on-one with him. Dida has great fighting ability. Even Domes, Baji's sword trainer, is amazed by his fighting skills. After fighting Dida, Baji was badly injured and suffered injuries to his legs and arms. Cage, who always secretly followed Baji, tried to comfort him when he was crying in his room. Baji felt very sad because his body was so weak and he was always losing against Dida. Since then, the friendship between Baji and Cage has grown stronger. A few days later, King Bas was declared dead, and the royal advisors began to announce the contents of the will written by King Bas, where it's revealed that he decided to choose Baji as the successor to the royal throne. After hearing the will, Dida was shocked and could not believe that his father preferred Baji over him. A very disappointed Dida protested against the magic mirror that was given to him by the king as a gift. The magic mirror, which was able to talk, spoke to Dida and told him that he need not worry because, in the end, the kingdom would still choose him as the next heir to the throne. The magic mirror's prediction came true, and Dida was selected as the king of the Bas Kingdom as Hiling and all the royal commanders had revolted to choose Dida and replace Baji. Baji felt very sad and disappointed with the decision. A few days later, Bibin, who is Dida's sword trainer, informs Baji that Cage has gone to wander in the wild. Realizing that his best friend has disappeared, Baji decides to go searching for Cage. Although initially, Baji's plan was opposed by Hiling, he was finally allowed to go to the outside world with 2 bodyguards, Domes and Hokuro. When Hiling lets go of Baji, she secretly worries about him and feels that something bad might happen. Deep inside her heart, Hiling cares for Baji. But ever since her real son Dida was born, she had naturally become more fond of him. On the other hand, Dida struggled to get a high rank in the assessment of the new king's rankings. After being tested by the judges, Dida only got a rank of 90. Dida often dreamed that his older brother would take the throne from him again. However, as suggested by the magic mirror, Daida decided to take power from his father's dead body. Meanwhile, Baji, who has been on a long journey in the wild world, arrives at a hot crater called the Gates of Hell. Domes invites Baji to take a closer look at the Gates of Hell, but it turns out that it was only part of Domes' plan to kill Baji by pushing him into the crater. Previously, Domes was ordered by Daida to kill Baji. Knowing this, Hokuro felt very angry and immediately fought against Domes. As a result of the fight, one of Domes' hands was cut off. On the other hand, Baji managed to survive. He was protected by Cage, who had been hiding in Baji's back, and we discovered that it was Bibbin who had sent Cage to protect Baji during his journey. He advised Cage to take Baji and find someone who could train him to become stronger. Cage asks Baji to come with him to the underworld through a secret path at the Gates of Hell. As Baji and Cage were on their journey, a mysterious smoke suddenly appeared and made them fall unconscious. Several troops from the Underworld Kingdom then bring them to the Underworld Royal Palace. Elsewhere, Daida begins to perform a ritual to extract power from King Boss's frozen corpse. His corpse was extracted to produce a magic potion that could make Daida strong like King Boss. However, at the last moment, Daida felt doubtful again and chose to throw the potion away. When Daida was about to get out of the dungeon, the commander called Apis appeared and tried to kill Daida. Apis is one of the royal officials who is very loyal to King Boss and Baji. However, Apis' efforts are prevented by the magic mirror, which is revealed to be the incarnation of a woman called Miranjo. Miranjo was a close confidant of King Boss and had made Apis a great fighter. Because Apis had already sworn allegiance to Miranjo, he had no other choice but to obey her wishes. He then makes Daida fall unconscious and forces him to drink King Boss's potion. It turns out the potion does not work to make him strong like King Boss, but instead functions to revive his soul. And now King Boss is back, taking over Daida's body and using it as a shell for his soul. Meanwhile, Baji and Cage had awakened from their blackout and had been brought before King Desha, who is exceptionally powerful and ranks second among the kings. As King Desha knows Baji is the son of King Boss, he was interested in finding out Baji's strength and fighting ability. Baji was then asked to fight one of King Desha's commanders. He showed his speed by dodging every attack made by the soldier commander. Unfortunately, King Desha was not impressed by Baji's evasive ability, so he expelled Baji and Cage from his kingdom. Before they left the palace, the commander told Cage that the person who was actually able to train Baji was the younger brother of King Desha, called Despa. Baji and Cage got excited and immediately went to meet with Despa. When they arrived at Despa's house, Cage immediately asked him to train Baji. However, before that, Despa asked Baji for a large amount of money before accepting him as a student. After Despa received a chest box filled with gold jewelry, he accepted Baji as his disciple. At first, Despa says that Baji doesn't have enough physical strength, so no matter how hard he practices, he would never improve. But Despa will not give up on him and look for the right method to find his expertise. For weeks, Baji underwent intensive training with Despa. The training results began to show when Cage saw Baji was easily able to destroy a large stone. We then get to see why Baji has such a small and weak body. Baji is small and short with little to no physical strength because of an agreement made between King Boss and a demon. King Boss and Miranjo, who wanted to have extraordinary power, had to sacrifice something to grant their request by the demon. In addition to the age and life of King Boss, the demon told him to have a child so that he could receive the power of it. On the other hand, Hilling, who received the news that Domes had killed Baji, was very sad and angry. Hilling decided to sentence Domes and Hokuro to death, but before the execution was carried out, King Boss appeared and stopped them. King Boss said that Baji was currently alive and training somewhere. Then Domes and Hokuro were released from the death penalty and only expelled from the kingdom. After Hilling realized the person she saw in front of her was not Daida, but the King of Boss, she began to ask about Daida's whereabouts. King Boss ruthlessly replied that Daida had disappeared, which made Hilling so shocked she fainted. Miranjo asked King Boss for permission to go to the underworld that night. Miranjo wanted to gather more troops to increase King Boss's power. The next day, when Hilling was awake, she came to King Boss and asked him to return Dida. Suddenly, Hilling heard the voice of Dida, who was currently trapped in King Boss's chest. When Hilling was about to cleave King Boss's chest, the head guard stopped her, as he is loyal to King Boss. Elsewhere, Baji had finished his training with Despa, and Baji was ready to face his enemies. Cage initially doubted Baji's ability because his sword was very small. However, Despa explained that in addition to Baji's ability to evade his opponent's attacks, he could defeat his enemies by attacking the weak points of each opponent. Baji and Cage thanked Despa for all the knowledge and training he gave. Cage then invited Baji to return to the palace and resolve the conflict. But Baji had doubts about going back as he was still traumatized by the assassination attempt on him ordered by Domes. Baji thought that it was Hilling's orders. However, after Baji reminisced about when Hilling loved him as a child, he was finally willing to return to the palace. On the other hand, King Desha realized that his youngest brother, called Alkin, had escaped from the underworld prison. King Desha had deliberately locked his brother up because he had made a pact with a demon to become immortal. After King Desha found out that Alkin was going to Boss's kingdom, he decided to go with his troops to the palace and establish dominion over Boss's kingdom. After Alkin and some prisoners from the underworld had arrived at Boss's palace, they captured King Boss and locked him up in a dungeon. The prisoners of the underworld now controlled the royal palace of Boss. Meanwhile, Baji and Cage, who had been received by the underworld warriors from King Desha, went straight to Boss's royal palace. However, Baji didn't realize that the underworld warrior had a plan to take over the Boss kingdom. On the way to the palace, Baji and the underground soldiers were stopped by Alkin. Alkin accidentally found himself in the middle of the city, slaughtering the townsmen. The underworld warrior commander, who remembered Despa's message regarding the warning not to let Baji fight Alkin, immediately asked Baji to go first to Boss's palace and protect Queen Hilling. When Baji arrived at the palace, he saw the two-headed snake that had always accompanied him being beaten by a giant called Gigan. Baji incapacitated Gigan, showing great strength, and asked Hilling to heal his beloved snake. Hilling was surprised to see Baji's strength before revealing that she had run out of healing potions. Luckily, Cage had a spare few bottles of potions to make more healing potions. While Hilling was trying to heal the snake and several injured dogs, Baji fought back and defeated Gigan, who had risen from his state of unconsciousness. The dogs that had previously been the companions of the prisoners of the underworld eventually became Baji's companions, and even Gigan, who had just been defeated by Baji, became obedient and swore allegiance to him. After that, the two-headed snake told Baji to immediately go to the dungeon to prevent the underworld forces from entering Boss's palace. On the other hand, Alkin, who was fighting the underworld warrior commander with his army, was suddenly struck by lightning. The lightning was magic sent by King Desha to defeat Alkin. Despa, who saw Alkin collapse, immediately tied him up with the rope he had prepared. Meanwhile, King Desha and the rest of the underworld army had already arrived at Boss's palace through the underground gate. At the same time, Baji and Gigan had arrived at the dungeon. King Desha told Baji that he wanted to catch Miranjo, who had released the underworld lords and brought them to Boss's palace. King Desha then revealed that Miranjo was the mastermind behind all this chaos. Gigan, who did not want to return to the prison of the underworld, directly attacked King Desha. When King Desha was about to counterattack, Baji quickly prevented him. Suddenly, King Desha got a telepathic message from Despa saying that he would not win against Baji. Despa suggested that King Desha retreat and let Baji fight King Boss so that, when Miranjo was left alone, Desha could defeat her and the cursed demon who was with her. After hearing the explanation, King Desha agreed and immediately promised Gigan a position as a warrior of the underworld kingdom if Gigan was willing to return to the underworld palace with him. After receiving Baji's blessing, Gigan accepted the offer and King Desha and the underworld army returned to their kingdom. On the other hand, Miranjo had now been captured by the prisoners of the underworld. She began to send messages to Alkin through telepathy, asking him to save her. After receiving the message from Miranjo, Alkin quickly untied the ropes around his body and ran towards the palace. When Alkin arrived, he coincidentally ran into Baji and Cage. He intended to kill Baji, so the battle between Baji and Alkin was unavoidable. Even though Baji stabbed Alkin many times, Alkin still survived and wasn't even injured. Baji, who realized that Alkin was immortal, had no other choice but to continue attacking him. Even the commander of the underworld army and Despa couldn't defeat Alkin. After seeing Baji almost being killed by Alkin, Cage turned into a giant shadow and swallowed Alkin. However, Alkin revived by piercing Cage's body with his sword. As a result, Cage died instantly. Alkin then killed Baji, who was already in a weak condition with multiple stab wounds. We then get to the moment when King Boss was imprisoned, talking about his past with Miranjo. Dida, still trapped in King Boss's heart, witnessed the memory. Miranjo was once a child who came from a place called Hamura, the land of magicians. The residents of Hamura were the first humans who dared to oppose the power of the gods. Boss, who was wandering the country and was helped by Miranjo's mother, helped the people of Hamura vanquish the cruelty of the gods. At first, all went well, but some of Hamura's residents made an alliance with the gods to fight the citizens of their own land. The treacherous alliance then killed Miranjo's mother and tortured Miranjo inhumanely. They cut off both of Miranjo's hands and skinned her face. Boss, who knew this, was very angry and immediately killed all the traitors. Boss then went with Miranjo to leave the country, and Boss slowly began to fall in love with Miranjo. They then met a demon and asked it to make Boss the strongest human in the world. The demon granted Boss's request at the expense of his age and the strength of his first child. Miranjo, who realized that Boss's life was coming to an end, made a plan so that she could resurrect Boss after his death. Later, Miranjo deliberately made Boss marry Hilling and have a child, who was Dida. From the very beginning, Miranjo had prepared Dida to be the body for the soul of King Boss. After seeing this past, Dida was furious with his father, but felt bad for Miranjo. Dida then promised Miranjo that he would replace King Boss to protect her, as Dida wholeheartedly believed Miranjo was a good person. Dida's assessment proved correct. After Miranjo saw Baji had been killed by Alkin, she immediately left the mirror and entered the body of Soldier. She approached the bodies of Baji and Cage to heal them. As Miranjo healed them, Despa could see glimpses of Miranjo's sad past. Despa then told the memory to Baji and asked that he take the appropriate action to solve this problem. A few moments later, Baji and Cage came back to life due to the healing of Miranjo. Earlier, when Baji rose again to fight Alkin, King Boss suddenly appeared and healed everyone with the healing power of Dida. King Boss then advanced toward Alkin and prepared to fight him. The power of Alkin's sword was unable to match the power of King Boss, who retaliated by destroying Alkin with the power of his mace. However, Alkin could still rise again because he was an immortal. King Boss then had the idea of crushing Alkin's body into a ball of flakes and burying the body fragments into a very large boulder, so Alkin wouldn't be able to regenerate his body anymore. After that, King Boss came to meet Miranjo, who was in the magic mirror, and apologized for making her suffer tremendously in the past. King Boss, who still loved Miranjo very much, said that he would go with her to the afterlife if he died in the last battle. It seemed that King Boss didn't know that Miranjo's soul couldn't go to the afterlife because she had violated the agreement with the devil by resurrecting King Boss again. After that, King Boss told everyone in the palace that he would kill anyone who tried to take Dida's body and bring him back to life. Baji, who still loved Dida, chose to go forward and face King Boss. The other dignitaries, Domes, Bibin, Dorsh, and Apias, supported Baji. When Domes was about to attack King Boss, Baji suddenly stopped him. Despa explained that currently King Boss was in Dida's body, so the only person who could fight him without killing Dida was Baji. The epic battle between Baji and King Boss finally began. At first, Baji could only dodge King Boss's attacks while trying to find his weak points. After a while, Baji finally discovered King Boss's weakness. He destroyed the mace held by King Boss and attacked his weak point. Within seconds, King Boss was directly knocked to the ground. He then crawled over to Miranjo to destroy her, so he could return Dida to his original body. However, the attempt was prevented by Baji, as he thought it could harm Miranjo. Miranjo, who saw the sadness on Boss's face, chose to yield and asked Baji to destroy her magic mirror so Dida could regain control of his body. After Baji destroyed the magic mirror, King Boss's soul and Miranjo's soul flew up. The giant red devil who had made a pact with them suddenly appeared and flew into the sky to eat Miranjo's soul. Miranjo apologized to King Boss because she couldn't go to the afterlife with him. A few seconds later, the red demon was struck by a thunderbolt sent by King Desha. The commander of the underworld army immediately decapitated the red demon before it could recover. Despa then made an offer to the red demon. He would return the red demon's head if the demon was willing to grant one wish. When Despa was about to make his request, Dida suddenly appeared and stated his request first. Dida wanted the demon to bring Miranjo back to life. The red devil immediately granted Dida's request, and in turn, Dida now fulfilled his promise to protect Miranjo. Seeing the presence of Miranjo, who was able to live again, made Despa happy, so he gave up his request to Dida. Overjoyed, Hilling, who saw her two beloved children survive, hugged them both. In the end, everyone in the palace forgave Miranjo's previous actions, and she promised that she would change herself into a better person. After that, Dida knelt before Baji and handed over the royal throne to him. From that day on, Baji received the title of king in the Boss Kingdom, and everyone was happy to welcome their new king. Cage, who felt that his task had been completed, decided to leave Baji at Boss's palace. The next day, when the inauguration for the new king took place, Baji realized that Cage had disappeared. A confused Baji tried to find Cage throughout the palace, but his search was unsuccessful. Even though Baji became a king who was loved by his people and carried out his duties fairly, he still felt that something was missing. Hilling realized this and told Baji that he no longer needed to hold back and was allowed to seek freedom with Cage. Hilling always thought that Cage was a true friend who made Baji happy and shine brightly. Hearing this, Baji decided to return the title of king to Dida and went on a quest to find Cage. After several days of traveling, Baji was finally able to meet Cage again. He was so happy that he burst into tears. Although initially Cage was angry at Baji for giving up his position as king, Baji informed Cage that he would wander and build an empire of his own one day.